Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark, and we are back on for another episode of, well, I guess, I don't know, is this Wuxia Workshop, or is this an isolated Halloween special?
Let's just like the Simpsons Halloween specials. This is the Wuxia Workshop Halloween special.
Okay.
So it's a little different. There's no movie involved. We're just talking about gaming stuff.
And before we start, I want to mention I'm back in at my place. People that have been listening probably know I've been recording out of another location, and it's been affecting coordination of things. And so if I seem more at ease today, it's because we're back sort of in the normal situation that we're always recording in. So today we're going to talk about House of Paper Shadows, which is the Halloween module that I put out for Bedrock Games, and Joel was kind enough to take a look at it and give me some thoughts on it, and we just decided that we'd talk about it, to sort of celebrate the release and celebrate Halloween, because the intent of the adventure was to put out like the perfect Halloween module. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll put the ball in your court, Joel, because I can't really say anything without just sounding like I'm trying to sell something. So
right, the author reviewing the own work always has a sort of I don't know, just kind of vanity thing to it, I guess. But like I think that reasonably you should be vain about this. I would be really proud if I had made a module this good. So taking it from your goal, which is making what is basically the perfect Halloween module, and my goal, which is getting a module that is something that I would actually put in a game, run, steal from for a game. You did really close on both of them. I would definitely use this. I don't know if it's the perfect Halloween module, but like, no joke, it's up there. It's really something. Right before the podcast, I was telling you about how I was like looking through it, and I was like, this is fantastic, but it reminds me of something, and it reminds me of Castle Ravenloft, in that it takes it takes something that isn't necessarily universally horror, which is it's for the Ogre Gate RPG you made, right? And that's not a universally horror game, just like D&D is not a universally horror game, but there are horror elements in both. And it emphasizes the horror element in a way that is really immersive and fun. It has a lot of elements in common with Castle Ravenloft, in that it has a really beautiful isometric map inside, which, by the way, I was just going through a couple of days ago, just kind of admiring it, and I was recognizing, I'm cracking it open right now and checking it out, I was recognizing a very fun element, which is the art itself is extremely easy to correspond to the gameplay. Like, the isometric map is right next to a top-down map with the key, and the key links very cleanly and directly to that isometric map, and that links very cleanly and directly to the descriptions in the key, which are incredible. Like, for example, I could go on about this. I am going to go on about this a lot. It's really freaking beautiful. But for example, here in the kind of like northern chunk, the northeastern chunk corner, there's this really fascinating, like, organic looking room that's drawn on there in the isometric map. And as you go up, it's a multi-tiered structure. It's this kind of stone roundhouse. That same organic looking structure is in every room that's above that vertically. That's really visually arresting. So I can just look right across over to the top-down map, which is keyed, and it directly corresponds to this room 8, and of course other rooms are 27 and 44. And indeed, if you flip to any of those in the key, which is a couple of pages off, you get these wonderful descriptions of this room that is filled with this horrible fleshy mass, the spirited flesh of Zun Li.
Yeah,
Again, this is one of those things where, and I have to compare this a little bit to Maze of the Blue Medusa, which I also recently acquired because they did a reprinting, thank God. I've been trying to get my hands on that forever. And they do the same thing where, even though that module does tell you that only terrible GMs, quote-unquote, read directly from the text, you're very tempted to, because the text itself in the key is extremely good. Mm-hmm. It's evocative, it's fun to read, and it's fun to say out loud. And so it gives you every reason on earth to not take its advice. And I kind of feel that same way. Like, I could seriously, like, if this whole review was me just being like, and this is cool too, and just reading out loud the exact literal text here, it would still be a pretty glowing review.
Well, I appreciate that. That map, by the way, is done by Francesca Burrell, who I really have to compliment, because this was not an easy as you can see, it's like number one, it's the circular dungeon, which is very, very challenging, and you're quite right. Like, I definitely wanted to get that Castle Ravenloft vibe. I mean, people who know me know Ravenloft is my favorite setting. Castle Ravenloft is I consider it one of the best modules ever, and pretty much any of the early Ravenloft modules tended to ape Castle Ravenloft. You know what I mean? Like, even Feast of Goblins, it had those same kind of maps in it, and it did a lot of the same kinds of little things, and so that's what I was trying to do there. And this looks beautiful, but I can tell you from my own notebook, the which I don't have here. I left it at the other location, or otherwise I'd show it to you. But the original maps that I gave Francesca are pitiful. They get the job done. Do you know what I mean? Like, I knew what was where, and for my purposes, but she had to do a lot of work to take those model maps and turn them into something really amazing.
I think you can actually find this map online. I think it's on her page.
Yeah, like, she posted it on her Instagram, and I think she's got like various images of it online in different locations.
You should link it. You should really link it into this video or this this because oh my god, the map is gorgeous.
Remind me, because I will always forget to do these sorts of things. In fact, you know what? People might hear some clicking, but I will type a note to myself just so I don't forget.
Y'all are gonna thank us even if you hear the clicking. This map is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a really good map, and I think I don't know. I really, the big challenge of it obviously is that, again, the circular dungeon is sort of a tricky thing to do, and so I just was very impressed. I've never
seen anything like this before. Not that's specifically like a roundhouse circular thing, and it's multi-tiered, which is another fantastic thing about it. Not only so I've heard this termed in modern game design as location-based adventures.
Yeah,
which is one way to say it. But I think that in a more primal sense, this is just the architecture of the place itself is an element of the whole thing. Like, there's something almost sinister even about the shape of this place. And it's the circular theme comes back into it because there's a chunk of this, which is its own little self-contained adventure, which is the time travel thing with the time sword, which also is... I can't... There is so much, dude, packed into this that it's hard to even talk about. Because, like, okay, so the map is really good. Mm-hmm. The map looks good. And then if you get into the key, not only does it look good, it's like this horrible funhouse dungeon of all these horrifying things. There's really creative and interesting traps. All the treasure is unique and has a unique kind of haunted horror aspect to it. Like, just today, I was going through it, and and by the way, that treasure, not only is it keyed into the rooms, there's also a separate part in the end of this that specifically tells you, again, what all the treasure does. Which is fantastic, because it means you don't have to necessarily put it in the keyed room. Oh, God, it's easy to, like, kind of spiral out and see all the stuff this module can do. So you're going to have to bear with me. I'm going to gush a little bit. But, like, just to give you an example of the one I saw today, it's the robe that the ghost hunter died in. And his, let me see, where is it? Where is the damn thing? It's the robe the ghost hunter died in. And, like, his blood stained it. And so now if you wear the robe, you have ghost hunting powers.
Yeah, that was... And I think that was an idea that was inspired by a movie called The Bride from Hell that I saw, where there was a robe that was kind of like that. And
it's a very wuxia kind of thing. But there's not a lot of places in this, and this is a problem, a reasonable complaint that people have with D&D, which is the whole go in, get gold, come out, is a very prevalent chunk of old D&D, because gold turns into experience points in older D&D. And although that's fine, it's a little bit bland to just count gold pieces and what have you. And this module very skillfully sidesteps that, because it recognizes that magic items and treasures are something that give you power without necessarily being linked to a numerical expression of your character getting more, like, build options.
Yeah.
So...
Which is something you can totally do in D&D. I mean, when I run D&D campaigns, I tend to lean on the magic items a little more than on the gold pieces, but... I mean, and I think it also depends on the edition you're playing, because different editions will emphasize magic items more or less.
Oh yeah, Fifth is actually really forgiving with doing magic items. It doesn't have the GP to XP link. Mm-hmm. I actually did a one-shot of 5th edition that was an hour-long an hour-long prep time and then a 3-hour-long session, so it was super tight. Mm-hmm. And I recognized when I was designing that it was probably better just to give them magic items instead of having them haul around gold, because they had an immediate game impact. And it's the same thing here. Being able to hunt ghosts is a really useful thing to have in a haunted freaking roundhouse, so it immediately changes the way the game is played. There's a lot of that just seeped into the way these rooms work. They're all interdependent in that way. Mm-hmm. And you can approach them strategically, but in addition to approaching them strategically, and there being a strategic unity to them and a strategic unity to the challenges, there's also a thematic unity to the challenges. It's all linked by the theme and by the little mini-adventure where you can travel back in time to fight the to try to prevent the tragedy that led to the creation of the Roundhouse. So there's just so much to appreciate in that writing. It's like overwhelming to try to talk about it, because like that's the kind of links and richness and interconnectivity that you dream about encountering in something like this. And it's the kind of stuff you encounter in only a few modules. Like Yoon Soon has something that's very close to that, although it's a little more scattered. Mazes of Blue Medusa absolutely certainly does. Most of Zach Smith's work it has a strong internal unity like that. But this one does also. And that's so rare and so wonderful to see.
Now, when you say internal, I'm just curious, what do you mean by internal unity? I'm just a little bit cloudy on the...
Okay, so to contrast, I'll give you another example module that I've been running off and on, which is... what is that? The name of that thing? I'm drawing a blank on it now. It's the one that Jenna Jacques did way back in the day, the Caverns of Thracia. There it is. I had to draw it out from my memory. So Caverns of Thracia is a huge, mega dungeon. There's lots of levels. There's lots of stuff. And although there's some bleed between, the theme or the characters or monsters that are in one given level, it doesn't really have an overarching cohesive theme to the dungeon. It's just a big dungeon with lots of variety.
And just to emphasize, she's a really good designer, so this is not...
No kidding. There's a reason I call this a classic.
Because that was out before even Castle Ravenloft, right? Like that was...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one of the ancient modules that showed people how good D&D could be.
If you weren't around, and I wasn't around in the early days of the hobby, but I was around in the mid-'80s, and the things actually start, innovations would actually happen and change. You know what I mean? People would do things differently, and so... you can't really compare modules from one era to the next if something wasn't done yet.
Well, right. We're talking about effectively comparing a modern work to one of the initial bedrocks of D&D.
Yeah.
But again, I think the comparison is fair because in a lot of ways,
I'm very uncomfortable with the comparison.
Well, what I'm saying is okay. Even comparing it to what is undisputably a gold standard of dungeon design.
I'll tell you why. Only because she's had such an influence, not just me, but on everybody in the hobby.
Oh yeah, no, my design's heavily influenced by her thinking and the way she puts things together. And that interconnectedness really didn't even exist. You might have got something let's go away from that for a second and compare it to kind of a funhouse dungeon Tomb of Annihilation. It's a good example where the kind of theme of Tomb of Annihilation is dangerousness to the characters that go into it. It's sort of famous for killing people, and it's designed that way. But you wouldn't necessarily say that all the stuff inside of that has a perfect logical consistency to it. It's kind of it's all sort of firewalled ideologically from the other things in it. And one step less firewalled, and you get something that has an incredible unity. Again, it's a gold standard. You get something like Caverns of Thracia. But if you keep stepping forward, the next thing you get something like Castle Ravenloft, where Castle Ravenloft's scares were directly related to the overall theme of Castle Ravenloft. It wasn't just that it was, here's a monstrous thing, and here's another different monstrous thing. All the monsters kind of shared a common unity. And even more unified than that is House of Paper Shadows. Because not only are they unified in that kind of universal monster movie thing, they're all unified very cleanly around this kind of wasp demon paper shadows thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about the unity. I'm talking about okay, does it make sense that this trap is in this room? Is there a place where the scare you just encountered, as unique and weird as it is, and there's a lot of unique and weird scares in here, but as unique and weird as it is, does that scare make sense in the context of the history, the in-universe history of the House of Paper Shadows? And yes, it does. They're all very cleanly linked to the history of the House of Paper Shadows. This happened because this happened, and this is how it links to the house, and that's why the scare is here. It's all very cleanly described.
Okay.
And that's not universal. Because, like, remember the little slip and slide in Tomb of Annihilation that goes to a Sphere of Annihilation? And it's like, well, why is that there? There's no explanation of that. It's just there because Gary Gygax thought it was cool. And there's some stuff like that in Caverns of Thracia. Like, there's an underwater tentacle monster in Caverns of Thracia. Where'd it come from? Jenna Jacques thought it was cool. She put it in there. You don't necessarily need to explain that thing in that way.
Also, there's something to be said too for the opposite approach, which is you put it there without explanation, and then the GM has to come up with the explanation after.
Right, this can be cumbersome.
Yeah, that can be cumbersome, but it could also be, I think, in the hands of like a competent GM, that can be a very effective, not just effective, like a fun way to run a game. Like when like when I make a module, like a lot of things, when I'm, you start with sometimes with the coolness, and then you tie it with a thread to the reason it's there. You know what I mean? And I think that's an exercise. Like every GM that is accustomed to using random tables, for example, they have to get into that ability to do that, to be like, oh, this weird thing came up. Why is it there? In a module, you don't necessarily have to explain why it's there, but when the players start prodding it during a session, you may have to. So
yeah, that's one of those things you may have to justify. I think
like just as a stupid example, if there's a kobold in the room and the players, instead of killing the kobold, decide to torture it and demand, "Why are you here? Where, who is your leader?" You have to come up with stuff, and so it's that riffing.
Why was this kobold there?
Yeah.
The reason the kobold is there is because I rolled a 7.
Which, by the way, my understanding is that's what caused the original Castle Ravenloft in the first place, which was that it was the result of a random result coming up on a table where I think Tracy Hickman was making a like a random dungeon or something, and a vampire came up, and it became this thought of exercise. Well, why is there a vampire in the dungeon? And then I think that led to, if I'm correctly informed, that's what led to Castle Ravenloft.
I like that too. Actually, I really like the really, really ancient dungeon encounter tables. Those got linked to me forever ago when I was trying to make another different game I was trying to make. And I got to looking at those, and I love that. I love that there wasn't anything attached to those tables. It was a pure exercise in creativity. Because you would roll and you would get Manticore on level 3, and it's like, what is a Manticore doing? Using that as a spur for your own creativity is a really good idea. And it does kind of force you to think about things creatively. And you do, as a human being, as a pattern-seeking creature, you do naturally kind of seek to sort of unify the internal logic of the random stuff you're pulling out. D&D is really cool for that. Actually, a lot of role-playing games are really cool for that. So I'm not gonna knock that, because I do like that as a distinct thing. I think that's really fine, and actually it's something that you should seek out a lot. However, on the other hand, you don't always want that at the table. A lot of games expect you to be that creative about a lot more elements at a table. Like I tried to GM Fate for a long time. I actually have a copy of Fate Core over on my shelf there. And when I was running it, what I found was I did like the versatility, but I found that I had to do that for every roll and every stat and everything that entered into the game. Mm-hmm. Like, because whenever you roll, you don't just generate, like, yes or no answers. You generate whole new aspects, which are important elements of the game that tell you something about the narrative of the game, because it's a narrative-based system. And that level of spontaneous creativity is something I wasn't really comfortable with as a GM. I like having the map there. I like having an idea of where some of these encounters came from. Like, to give you a contrasting way of doing the encounter tables, I build the encounter tables out of things I've already keyed into the dungeon or the things around the dungeon. So, like, if it's, like, say, the House of Paper Shadows and it's in some given geographic area, whatever monsters are wandering around that geographic area, whatever things have a layer there, in addition to whatever's layering within the house itself, I use that as the building blocks to make the encounter list, so you don't have weird results coming up. So it very much gives you... Yeah, right. There's a lot more unity to it that way. You don't have to have any creativity at the table.
No, that's true. And for a random encounter table, that's what I think most people do. That's what I do for sure. But I think what I was saying, I was talking more about random dungeon generation tables.
Yeah, which is a little... And you can do that spontaneously. If your style is such that you can find a way to justify a vampire being in this dungeon, on the fly, and that's like something that's really satisfying and fun for you as a GM, that's totally a thing you can do. I'm not going to knock that style, because I've done that before, and it's fun.
I think the advantage... Go ahead.
Oh, no, that was pretty much what I had to say.
I think the advantage of it is you come up with stuff you wouldn't normally think of. So, like, when I first was, trying to sort of think of how to make a wuxia game, it was coming on the heels of many 3rd edition wuxia campaigns that I had run. That was sort of that became sort of my preferred system for wuxia. I had other systems I liked. The biggest problem with them generally being that they were usually harder sells for the players, and wuxia is already tough. So 3E was often the best thing because it had that wonderful ability to customize through the character optimization and build system, which in a lot of ways I often thought of as a negative, but for wuxia I found that to be really useful. And so, but 3E is a very dungeon-oriented edition of the game. And, and I often would make dungeons in my wuxia games, and I would use some of the random tables for generating dungeon content and stuff like that, and it would lead me into really interesting directions. And so, because you would end up with, okay, there is like an overall theme, like maybe this is like a very frog-like dungeon complex where there are like frog demons and things like that, but for some weird reason there's this demonic butterfly in there now, and I have to figure out why the demonic butterfly is either present, working with, working against, imprisoned by, like, why is the demonic butterfly there in the first place? And so it can create...
That variety in dungeons is very important, too. Because it winds up being really kind of samey, like, oh, wow, more frog demons. But you come into a room with a giant magic butterfly, the players want to know the answer to that question. And if you have thought of the logic beforehand, it's great. Yeah. Well, which could lead us directly back to House of Paper Shadows. There's a huge variety of cool-ass things in here. Like, really... I'm really impressed with the body horror stuff. Like I love that. I'm a big Cronenberg fan. And Spirited Flesh of Zunli. Yeah, by the way, I just flipped it open randomly to this page. I've been on this page a lot because there's a gorgeous little chunk of artwork with this guy that's like growing into a wall there.
That's one of my favorites. That's inspired by Hex, which is a movie we covered on Wuxia Weekend a couple of weeks ago. It's a black magic movie, and there's a scene at the end. Well, I want to be careful what I say.
You don't want to spoil it.
I don't want to spoil it, but it's also a little bit racy, and I don't know if this is the right time for that. So
probably horrible. Well, let's keeping out of the raciness. Can you still describe some of the scene?
There's a ritual in which they're trying to. Again, I don't want to spoil the movie, so I won't. But they're trying to get rid of a haunting, and the woman that's trying to get rid of the haunting hires this black magic practitioner who has her like shave her head almost like a monk, and just paints her whole body with all of these characters on them, and it looks a little bit like the characters all written on Zunli there, but it's on a woman, and it's for a much different final effect, we'll say. But I think that I was definitely drawing on that. Like that was the model that I had in my head when I was thinking of the Spirited Flesh of Zunli. And I just thought it was really cool. This guy that's like, like his flesh has become this prison tower inside of the structure.
He is part of the architecture as well as one of the monsters, which is really neat.
And in one of my campaigns, he became the new master of the House of Paper Shadows because I had player characters that decided to work with him against the other forces that are in power there. And
that's another important element of this, is realizing that there's more than one way to approach it. You can approach it by playing the powers of the house against one another. They're only in the most loose of alliance anyway. There's like an inherent kind of disharmony and chaos to them, and you can exploit that if you're a clever player, as clearly evidenced.
Yeah, and I think that's like whenever I have characters in books like this, I always try to think of what their motives are and what they want. And so there are a lot of characters in there that want something rather specific, that if the players realize that, they can maybe work with them in some way. I think that's really good for any kind of location-based adventure.
This cat is not going to leave me alone today. She is just howling for attention. All right, now she's got food. Don't feel bad about her, people. She's just whiny. You're a fat kitty. All right, so that actually brings me to another point. The ghost encounters that you have in here, I was checking out those a couple of weeks ago because you were nice enough to send me this wonderful review copy, and like that's another thing where like these things show up, they're ghastly because they're ghosts, and some of them are pretty grotesque. They provide clues to the house, and they're encounters in their own right, and just again, it's just another one of those like. There's the shadow puppets, there's all these things you can encounter just by exploring the house. You clearly differentiate between high traffic and low traffic areas of the House of Paper Shadows. And this is all really clear and really clean to use procedurally as a GM. So if you just have players that are in there wandering around, the game generates so much interesting stuff for you. You'll never encounter this thing twice the same way. I mean, you could have several different parties go through this, or the same party go through it several times, and it would be radically different each time. And every little chunk of it is so worthy of being included in a game. Like, even if it's just a little stuff, like the little, the Room of Many Arrows. By the way, another great little chunk of art next to that one with the guy that's totally peppered these arrows.
Which is, and that artwork, that's sort of like a combination of 8-diagram pole fighter meets House of Traps was the idea there.
You could really see the 8-diagram pole fighter in that.
Yeah. But yeah, no. Well, the high traffic thing that was a result of playtest. That was me realizing in playtest. Oh, like, I needed to have like areas that were high traffic designated because of the circular structure of it, and it was both like number one just to make the module more interesting, but also sort of a plausibility thing where it's like, well, they're gonna have people patrolling these areas of the house.
And it's one of those things where that's extremely useful if your players are infiltrating the house, and it's something that's a little closer to window dressing if they've been, say, invited to the house, because it gives you the opportunity as the GM to take a high traffic area and use that to introduce these elements visually to them as they're going through the house, being led there, and these things are being described to them. So like there's just a lot of that in this, where like there was clearly like this depth of thought, and I guess like you said, there was playtesting involved, which is always wonderful to hear about an RPG module. I'm certain a lot of them are released without playtesting, but because there was playtesting and you incorporated the feedback from the playtesting in it, there's a richness and a cleanness to this that really makes it like exciting as far as like looking at it as a GM and wanting to run it. This is approachable. It's approachable in a way that a lot of modules just are not. It gives you the instructions for actually making this a living part of your game, and that's just if you're in the House of Paper Shadows. Because I want to point out another thing that I loved about this, another Castle Ravenlofty thing, is that the influence of this house and its mistress, I guess you call her a mistress, is like saturated in the setting of Ogre Gate. Like even within this, it tells you like, okay, well here are where some of their informants are. Here's some of the places that you'll encounter these things. Here's what you'll encounter there. And there's stuff like that. So even if like this not only has to be a place where you could run like a Halloween themed one shot, you could also make this something the players like kind of stumble upon. You could also make it a place that is like somehow involving the characters or their backstories. You could make this the end of a really satisfying game of investigating this. Like all signs and clues point to it. That's amazing. There are so many latching on points because it's an organic part of the game itself, like the game's world. That's fantastic, and it does like the text itself instructs you on how to do that well. Oh my God, Brendan, that is so good.
Well, like, I appreciate the positive feedback from you.
I don't have a lot of complaints, man. Like, I want to give you like a more critical cross analysis, but I seriously can't help but gush about this. It's so good.
Well, I feel like, I mean, I was talking, we did this with a conversation with Nick last week, and I was telling him the same thing. Like, I normally am a lot more humble about the stuff we put out. Like, I can see a lot of the flaws in some of the books that we've released, and I know when I get the criticisms from people, when they're sound and when they're not. But with this one, I mean, and again, I mean, it's no book's perfect, and I certainly there are things I would adjust, but I feel like this is the best thing that I've put out in terms of adventure content and again, I think that it was because I sat down and I gave myself I sort of consciously was like, I'm going to make this really good. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that meant like I sort of raised the bar on myself, and I also gave myself the time to just think before I actually put anything to paper. And I think that made a big difference. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like the greatest thing in the world, but as far as our overall line is concerned, I think it's way up there with all of our other stuff. It's like
this is something that's good enough that like. Well, okay, so I also happened to grab the Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate core book, but I grabbed it because you gave me an advanced copy of this, and I read through it, and I was so impressed that I dropped $50 odd on that thing, because I was like, I have to run this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't do that for a lot of games. And last game I did that too was Adventure Conqueror King, and that was forever ago. Because I was like, I'll just spend $5 and kickstart this. I was kickstarting the Domains at War thing, and it came with a free copy of the core book. And I'm like, oh, cool, I can look at that OSR thing that's so popular nowadays. And that, of course, led me down the path of that being my favorite system now. But, like, that was like 5 years ago. It was a while ago. It's been a long time since I was this excited about a game. And, like, even, God, there's so much packed into these pages. Okay, so, like, even just reviewing it as, can you use this with any system? It's pretty modular. And there's a lot of reasons to use it. If you have, like, just kind of a whooshy-themed adventure, like, I could run this with Legends of the Wulin or Weapons of the Gods. I will probably recommend running it with Tian Shang once I finally get to the point where it's in a more, like, playable form. But, like, just looking at this structurally, as far as, like, what you get as an RPG consumer, like, as a person who wants to put stuff in their games, you get the whole House of Paper Shadows, just like buying Castle Ravenloft, which is impressive. You get a bestiary of a bunch of really nifty monsters, including the Shadow Puppet Demons, Ghosts. You get, what's her name, Ling Fang or whatever, the actual, like, Wasp Demon or something. Ling Yin, yeah. You get pre-made characters. You get a pre-made adventure, which you don't have to use in the House of Paper Shadows if you don't want to, but you can, in addition to just exploring it as a straight dungeon crawl, there's an actual adventure in here, which is this nifty little time travel thing, which I'd like to point out. There's a little a calendar of events in it, so you can pop in at different scenes and screw with that timeline in a lot of interesting ways. And so in addition to that, and you also get the magic items, and you also get pre-gen characters, and it's just like on and on and on with this stuff that you get in this book. There are so many approaches to using this content within the book, ignoring even getting Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate, which is just even, like, further giving you reason to grab that game. This thing is freaking amazing, Brennan. This is, like, dynamite. It's unbelievable. Actually, I saw someone describe it as black dynamite in a soft cover binding, and I'm like, yeah, that's about right.
The movie Black Dynamite?
Yeah, I was like, yeah, son. This is Dolomite.
I haven't seen that in many years, but I think I know what they mean by that comparison. So I take it as a compliment. I take it as a compliment. But yeah, no. I mean, it's sort of like again. I mean, it's sort of an odd brew of different influences. But if you like the old sort of 70s style horror, if you like body horror, if you like sort of these darker Shaw Brothers movies, that's kind of what was percolating. And
I have to point out, for not ever having read Junji Ito, this is a very Junji Ito work.
And you know what's
like,
funny?
If you like the Japanese body horror stuff, you're going to see some stuff that's very reminiscent.
I still have that. I bought that book on your recommendation, and I sat down. I was about to read it the other night, and something interrupted me. And I was like, on the, like when you're on the cusp of like, this is like I'm really looking forward to enjoying this. And
yep.
and so I will get to it, because that first page was very captivating. I thought that I can tell it's going to be good.
It is. His early stuff is really good. I actually recently grabbed one of his more recent books, and it's a much weaker entry. Okay. Unfortunately, it's like a 2015 book. I forget what it was called, but this is a collection of short stories, and like they just don't have the intensity of some of his earlier stuff, like especially Uzumaki, but also Gyo and the Fault of what was the Amishigaru Fault. I forget what it's actually called, but it's something like that. The Ashigaru Fault. That stuff is like almost sickening in how frightening and repulsive it is. So And again, like that same kind of caliber of horror and just the icky, squicky gookiness that makes this such a great monster bad guy adventure very present. And like, I'm not even commenting on the binding, which is really good. I'm not commenting on the art, which is breathtaking. I'm not commenting on the layout, which is really crisp and really readable. There's so much in addition to everything I just talked about. Like, it's hard to not gush. There's almost nothing in this. I can't think of one thing I would change about it. Like, I have yet to run it, granted, but like, I've ran things that are similar to this, and they run like clockwork. I don't have any reason to believe it won't. It's not too weighty. You keep all the descriptions.
I can weigh in there. I think because I had a review out, and I know that the reviewer had a little bit of trouble with running Ogregate the first time using this module. He liked the module, he thought it was fine, but like it was his first time out, and Ogregate is the kind of game where the challenge to it is it has all these kung fu techniques that are these moving parts.
Yeah.
And that the way I describe it to people is it's like running a campaign of D&D where everybody's a spellcaster. Every NPC, every important character is a spellcaster, and you have to keep track of all these different spells that people are performing.
And all the NPCs too. Yeah. So I think that's been termed exception-based design, and that's because it's being contrasted with a more unified central mechanic, like you'd seen something like Fate, or even in like D&D with like the roll D20 add skill modifier mechanic. Those are central, like universal mechanics, and then exception-based design is stuff like spells, or in this case, kung fu techniques, which all do very particular things within the rules.
Yeah, and what I would say is it's definitely something to be aware of when you run the module. Now, there are some cheats you can use, and for example, I'm just looking at and again, spoilers. If you're going to play in this module, don't listen to what I'm about to say. But for GMs, there's a character named Feng Yin, and she is sort of like the big bad in the module. And
her art makes her very much seem like the big bad. By the way,
I love the art for her. Especially when she's in her human form. I think that really gets sort of something. It looks like a Shaw Brothers movie that never happened to me, which is exactly what I wanted.
It does. Even her hat has an insectile vibe to it. She has like wings on her robe. This is beautiful.
And maybe Jackie found a Shaw Brothers movie that I haven't seen, but it's the kind of thing I know I would see in certain Shaw Brothers movies, and I just love the way it looks. But under Powers, what I've sort of or not under Powers, before Powers, what I do is I do describe two of her key techniques so that the GM at least has them in front of him or her when he or she's running the adventure. And so that's something that I encourage GMs to do. I also encourage GMs to make heavy use of that when I include that in a module. So basically there's a list of say 10 kung fu techniques in a given character. I would only expect the GM realistically to use the technique that I describe in the NPC entry, and if they're sufficiently familiar with the game, maybe use the other techniques. That's the approach I would take.
And I actually experienced something like that when I was running Exalted, back when I used to play that. Because in Exalted, you would have lists of 30 to 50 of these things in charms. And if you didn't have a strong familiarity with how those charms work, and you hadn't played them a lot, it was baffling. And even if you did, the interaction of those charms and how they're supposed to be used tactically was very, very unclear. So you just have these piles of powers that characters had, and no real hope of being able to translate that into actual gameplay.
No, it's easy. It is a big challenge. I mean, and luckily we don't tend to get that high, but it does still. You still will often have like most NPCs. You'll see about 10 kung fu techniques. Player characters can start getting up there like crazy eventually. And with the player characters, it's fine because it's like playing a wizard. You know your spells. It's the GM that has to do all this heavy lifting of there's a new martial hero. Now I need to be familiar with this guy's entire repertoire of kung fu techniques. So I strongly advise that GMs use cheats to help themselves get through that. I also think eyeballing it is totally fine. Like when I'm running a character, I'll often look at what their biggest damage output is, and I'll just that's what I'm gonna lean on for everything they do now. You know what I mean? Just to make it easier.
And I was actually in my the Discord, the Tiansheng Discord, a little bit ago, and one of the people that's in there is also designing their own mech game, and they had a fascinating revelation that goes along with those lines, which is you really only need your most powerful attack.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of the way they put it, and like that's a good way of looking at it. You really only need the best attack, and they were linking it to the amount of times you could use that attack before you had to go to a smaller attack type. But like that was a good insight. You really only need the attack that she's likely to use. I don't think it's necessary to write down all of the all the different things and interactions of the technique, or even necessarily the most likely ones, because even in her thing, and she has a big write-up. This is like 4 pages of cool stuff with her. But I kind of expect that from a character this central and this powerful of the whole thing. Like, even within that, you've got a section called Powers, and it's got 3 powers that are very unique to her. You would imagine she would use these in an appropriate circumstance. So if you're just kind of fighting her, like, you don't, like, that whole paragraph of powers, it's, like you said, it's like, I think it's 10, 12 powers here, and it's this tiny little paragraph. It's really easy. The only thing I would add to that, if I were running it, would either be what I usually do with spells or charms or the like, which is a little page number reference, and the book that it's found in. That I found that to be invaluable when I was running Exalted. Or I would add, like you suggested, a little like description of, okay, at her best, what are the attacks she's likely to use with these? What are the defenses? And that would be it.
Yeah.
So like, okay, that's a reasonable complaint you could level against this. You might have put that in, but I mean, that's not really too difficult to add in.
No, and she is a hefty entry. I will certainly say that. And again, what I tried to do in the book is I did aim for brevity in most of the descriptions. Like, I tried to do a paragraph or 2 at most for most characters. I still think I could have whittled it down more. In her case,
that is really good.
Yeah, in her case, what I assumed was, well, she's the big bad, so like you are going to need to familiarize yourself with her before you run the
she's not
book.
just a boss either. Like, she's so central to even the creation of the thing that the little mini adventure you have is about preventing her from doing the thing that led to the dungeon you're in. So like there's a centrality where there's 4 pages of her, but those 4 pages will pay a lot of dividends because you don't have to do that all at once.
Yeah.
Except maybe in the ultimate encounter with her.
Yeah.
Like, you can drop feed the content from her into the rest of the adventure, and you can actually drop feed the content from the rest of the adventure throughout your campaign. Yeah. Like that blood honey that's in here that makes you go insane and eat people, or try to drink their blood for a couple of minutes. That's a great thing to start the investigation that leads to this house. You know, you hear of like an inn where this happened to someone, and then as you're investigating it, you find out, oh hey, this honey is poison, even though it looks like normal honey, in a very particular way. Where'd you get this honey? Oh, well, this mysterious merchant came by with the shadow puppet troupe. Bam! You've got the campaign leading right to this House Vapor Shadows.
Yeah, and that blood honey, by the way, is inspired by Blood Parrot, the movie, which is a really good film. I would highly recommend people check it out. But there's a scene... Again, I got to keep this PG as I can, but like, you know, the image I'm talking about, the blood honey image is very specific, right? And I'm gonna show you the original thing that inspired it. But basically, what this was is it was an aphrodisiac that sort of had a really aggressive aphrodisiac, and it caused people to sort of look and behave like this, and so okay, so here we go. I'm going to send Joel the image so that he can see the.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this is the men afflicted by blood honey image. Is this the one that's the one I'm looking at in the?
Yeah, because we had a player character named Min who I believe was afflicted by the blood honey.
All right.
And obviously, I toned it down a little bit. In the movie, it's an aphrodisiac. It has a slightly different effect, but I kind of,
which won't necessarily translate something you want to see at the table, especially if you're going for like horror and body horror. There's some levels. Oh my, that is very purple. No, I can see the. I can see that one.
Yeah, if anybody, and you know what, I'll put an image in the link below.
Maybe with a little warning. It's not particularly graphic or anything.
Well, the scene is though. The scene is the scene is it's sort of a very aggressive aphrodisiac scene. that starts out violently but becomes sexual. It's one of these things that is classic Shaw Brothers.
It's very pulp. Oh boy. There we go. I had a button on sketch.
But what was cool about it was in that scene, it sort of allowed the movie to skirt the line between the supernatural and the mundane, because it looked like something supernatural had happened when it was really just this really weird aphrodisiac effect.
The first Detective Dee movie did something kind of close to that too. Actually, I
Yes.
watched it recently.
Yeah. Did you see that recently?
Yeah, no, I saw it a long time ago, and I really liked it. And I was like, at first, it felt a little bit like Sherlock Holmes versus the werewolf, kind of, where it was like you've got someone who is basically the Scooby-Doo of his generation, where everything has a mundane explanation. There's no such thing as magic. It's all science. He's a very Enlightenment era hero. And Detective Dee had something similar to that. And then they introduce like the beetles that have like the weird make people explode power. And like for me, I was like, okay, there's no science that backs that up. And then I thought about it. And I'm like, well, but it's not completely out of the question that something like that could maybe exist.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they eradicate the beetles after?
Yeah, they eradicate the only beetles like that in the world. So it's not totally out of the question that they could have like selectively bred a very rare strain of beetles with this very particular kind of poison effect. Okay, right.
And that's got a long tradition in wuxia. Like in Return of Condor Heroes, there are these flowers, and if you prick your finger on them, I what they call the passionless thorns. They're from the Passionless Valley. And if you prick your finger on them, they poison you so that anytime you think about love, you suffer and feel pain.
Ooh.
And the more thorn pricks you get, the more lethal it potentially is. So the hero is in love with Xiao Longnu, and he gets pricked and she gets pricked, and they both can't. It's this like horrific poison that anytime they think about each other, they have crippling pain and agony. And in the book, though, what ends up happening is Yanguo, the hero, eradicates the flowers after all the events in this Passionless Valley occur, and so it's this nice, neat sort of explanation that doesn't make it supernatural, because they're basically saying, well, this thing really existed, but the hero got rid of it, but it was a purely sort of mundane, like it was basically a drug kind of effect. It had there was some.
And how far away is that really from saying, oh, well, an evil genetic scientist with future science used this poison to make it so when the chemicals in your brain that are associated with love happen, it can be lethal or kill you? You could have an explanation in a science fiction movie that was exactly that. Yeah. And I totally buy it just because of my cultural bias.
But I'm curious about your experience with Detective Dee, because I didn't realize you had seen that. And that was one of the movies on my list that we were going to do at one point.
I have watched kung fu movies on my own before I met you.
I know that, but for some reason I didn't think that you had seen Detective Dee.
Well, the fact that it was termed Detective Dee intrigued me, because I didn't have, like, it's a Chinese cultural thing, like a detective who has kung fu powers. And I guess we have that in Sherlock Holmes, and it's a British thing, but, like, I mean, there's a Western equivalent to that, because you look at the Sherlock Holmes movies, or even the original books, a guy could fight. He fist fought. He had martial powers.
In the new Sherlock Holmes, they have him using some kind of weird Victorian martial art, right? Isn't that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, but even at the time, like, the original books have him fist fighting people. So, like, I didn't know that about Sherlock Holmes. Like, my introduction to Sherlock Holmes was the version we got in America, where in America we tend to see the British as kind of above that level of crassness and violence, and so he was a lot more like, oh, I'll use pure intellectualism to vanquish my foes. But no, for real, he could punch you out. So I think England would be the first to correct me on the whole, no, we're good at violence thing.
I think English style is they're good. They just don't talk about it like we do. We talk about it a lot.
We never shut up about ourselves.
Yeah. We're mouthy as a country.
Okay, we're getting away from the module here.
That's okay. It's engaging. I'm interested in this part of the discussion. But about the Detective Dee, I did want to hear your thoughts on just the I don't know, like, because this
surprise,
is
there was a movie in it.
Huh?
Remember when we said there wasn't going to be a movie? Surprise! There always was a
stealth
movie.
Now, it's been a little while since I've seen it, but it is one of my favorite movies, so I think I can talk somewhat intelligently about it. But I love that movie, and I love Choi Hark in general. And I'm very excited for the new one that just came out. In fact, I believe it's on Blu-ray now, and I know I have to get my copy. But how did you find that? Like, what would be your rating of the film if you were to give it like an A to F rating? What would it be?
An A to F rating? Oh, oof, that's hard. What's because I got to ask myself what's my criteria for A and F? Because okay, so here yesterday it's a Halloween season. I grabbed a copy of Pulse on Amazon. It's not on Prime. I had to buy it, but Pulse is a really nifty little horror Japanese movie that's very cerebral, and it's got almost a David Lynchy kind of vibe to it. And if I had to give a movie an A, it would be for something like, did it affect me? And it did. Like, I watched Pulse and I was creeped out of my mind. And does it stand up to repeat viewings? And, like, can I recommend it to my friends? Is it original? Is it well constructed on the terms of, like, how you would construct a movie and tell a story visually? And I think that's the criteria I would use. And for that, a movie like Pulse, which has an A in all those ratings, would have an A rating. So contrasting that, what would be an F rating for me? What's a movie that's just so loathsome that, like, you can only really enjoy it ironically? And I know a couple. I mean, like Troll 2 has got to be one of those. Troll 2 is something that you sort of can't enjoy genuinely because it's just so weird, you know? It's like there's a lot of, like, it was an Italian director and crew and, like, an all-American cast, as I recall. And there was just this huge, like, misunderstanding of cultural norms and expectations. And, like, so the whole movie is this strange lopsidedness to it. It's not... visually, it's actually really well made, because the Italian filmmakers were good filmmakers. But you can't really immerse yourself in the continuity of the world, because it's so, like, awkward, and it's... I don't know, like, in some ways it's brilliant, because it is dreamlike in its logic, but on the other hand, like, you're taken out of it by just how weird all of the characters are. There's no normalcy to contrast with it. So you gotta give it an F. So yeah, like, Troll 2, I guess, would be my F, where, like, I have to enjoy that ironically because I recognize there was some actual failure on the part of the filmmakers. They failed to do what they were trying to do. There are parts in it that are just kind of awkward and bad. Manos, Sands of Fate, any of the MST3K canards would have to be an F rating, you know, because there was some failure on the part of the filmmakers themselves. So Detective Dee, going there from the A to F rating, does it do something unique? And I don't know if I can say that it's unique in terms of, like, you know, Hero is a little similar to it, and there's other Chinese movies that have, like, a similar structure to it. The through line of it being an investigation is something I hadn't seen before in a wuxia movie. And this is clearly a wuxia movie. I didn't see that before, so that's pretty unique. But is it universally unique? Not really. There's a theme of imperial corruption with the Dowager Empress, which is that's played out. I've seen that before. So I'd have to give it closer to maybe a high C, low B rating there for originality. Does it look good? Is it well told as a visual story? Absolutely. Definitely it's an A rank there. It's beautifully crafted. Visually, it's very arresting. The fight scenes are consistently unique and surprising. That's an A. For wuxia movies, you want the fights to be something that you haven't seen in a wuxia movie before. You want the fights to have a unique element. And it's the difference between, like, if you're a big anime fan like me, there's fights in, let's say, Dragon Ball Z, or Dragon Ball GT, any of them, Dragon Ball Super, blah, blah, where there's fights where they're just throwing punches really fast, and then there's fights where they actually animate it, and they do unique movements. And those second ones are the ones that are universally preferred because they're interesting. They're visually interesting. And Detective Dee is loaded with that. So visually it's beautiful. And creatively, with the fight scenes, it's an A+. It's really fantastic. Is the plot something that I hadn't seen before? I've not seen a plot like that. Like I said, it's centered around an investigation. It has a lot of interesting reveals. And it has, like, a really good emotional through line to the character Detective Dee and the characters that are around him. Got to give it an A there. So, I mean, like, at the lowest, this movie has, like, a B+ or, like, a low A ranking. So I don't know if it's, like, quite on the level of creativity and uniqueness of something like Pulse. But as far as being well-made, entertaining, and having a lot of good, creative, unique ideas, it's definitely higher on the spectrum. So I'm going to go with a high B rating. It's not my gold stars, but it's definitely, it should be proud of its place because it really is a movie that's worth your time. And again, I don't say that about a lot of movies.
think there's a lot I like about Detective Dee. Number one, the atmosphere is perfect.
Yeah.
It just has this atmosphere, and Tsui Hark is so great at creating these little worlds. There's that underground marketplace in that blue, like that. Number one, if you're a D&D fan, you want to just fast forward right to the underground marketplace scene, because that's like a beautiful place to sort of use as a model for a dungeon or any kind of underground structure or section of a city.
Visually it is, and also, it's a dungeon that isn't hostile in the way you typically think of a dungeon as hostile. It's a lived-in place that's more friendly to just an adventurer going into it. It's like a goblin market in the middle of a mega dungeon.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that's great. I think we'll call it the entity that they fight there is brilliant. That would be, a GM could. 8 GMs could watch that scene and come up with 8 very different but very cool monsters or foes to send at the party, just based on the premise alone. I think that was a really cool. That premise was perfect. And I love the Beatles. The Beatle, the whole concept behind the mystery I adored. And
a good thing to point out in that fight is that it again directly relates to the theme of the movie, because when Dee's fighting them, he's a badass martial hero, but he doesn't beat them because he's a badass martial hero. He beats them because he figures out that there's a mystery behind what he's fighting, and he solves the mystery, and that's how he wins.
And also Andy Lau plays Detective Dee, and Andy Lau is an amazing actor. So I think this was a really good role for him. At the right time in his life, you know what I mean? It was like just the perfect moment for having him in this role. But the standout for me in this is Karina Lau as Empress Wu. That is the part of like she hangs over the whole movie and just like haunts it. She doesn't have all that many scenes. She's got a few key scenes, but most of the film is about Detective Dee. But they have a few points of interaction, and it just creates this I don't know what the word is, just this sense of doom and dread over everything. Do you know what I mean? Because she's not quite a bad guy, but she's kind of a bad guy. She walks this very fine line in the movie that's difficult to pinpoint.
She's antagonistic overall to Dee, but at the same time, she's not entirely unsympathetic or even like unapproachable or even villainous. Yeah. She does use villainous techniques, but she's a rich character. She's well portrayed. I think the theme I've seen before enough that I feel like it's played out, but I think the way it's carried off in this movie is well carried off. I can't complain about that.
I think the theme is somewhat unique in that it's Empress Wu rather than an emperor. And
sure.
Empress Wu is the only, she's the only woman to really establish a dynasty that was governed by a woman. There have been other empresses that had power, but not official power like she obtained. It's an interesting historical moment, and the way that they sort of have her embody. I guess the thing that she embodies in this movie is pure politics. Do you know what I mean? Just sort of like the imperial politics that would make somebody like Detective Dee either useful or disposable depending upon the circumstances. It's not that she hates him and she wants to cause him harm. It's that she uses people and she can, and if they're a problem for her, they can be cast aside. It's almost like a nothing personal type thing.
There's the powerful element of realpolitik to it.
Yeah.
And I think that we're supposed to read that again because it's for a Chinese audience. So I think we're supposed to read that as sinister at its core because it's rejecting like Ren and more like traditional Chinese like Confucian values. It's like there's no heart behind this. It's all about practicality, and that's not how we're supposed to do things. That makes it villainous. But as an American, I was like, yeah, realpolitik. Because I'm a horrible asshole at my core. So,
but she's like a very powerful character, and also very striking visually. If you ever seen Karina Lau, this is not how she's normally presented. Do you know what I mean? She's a very beautiful woman, and the way that they depict her in this, it's more striking than beautiful. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like but it's very imposing.
Presence it's not a feminine beauty presence. There's femininity to it, but there's and there is beauty to it, but it's more about the power of the whole role, and that's represented very well visually. Another high mark for the movie.
And again, this does tie back to House of Paper Shadows because Empress Ainu in the Ogre Gate setting that was the source of inspiration, was Karina Lau's depiction of Empress Wu. So, and she's one of the hooks in the adventure for going into the House of Paper Shadows. And like Empress Wu in the movie, she hires you with the intent of killing you after you've done the job. So, which again, that happened in one of my campaigns. And the party was furious when they found out. Which also sort of brings me to one of the parts of the movie that I really love, which is the unpredictable nature of it, because you never quite know who's gunning for him and who's on his side and who isn't. And I'm gonna.
We as the audience get to face the mystery with the same kind of apprehension that Dee has to. Very immersive, very good.
And the thing that I like about it a lot is the Ling Bingbing character Shang Guan, who's a historical figure, by the way. She's based on somebody real. Her death scene is shocking. Every time I see it, I'm surprised when she dies. Like I just never get accustomed to the fact that because you end up really liking her character, and you end up thinking of her as like she's the natural love interest of Detective Dee. Even if they don't fall in love, there's going to be something in the future. These characters have some chemistry here, and they drop her like that at a moment you don't expect her to get dropped, in a way you don't expect her to get dropped, that is horrifying, and I would say almost body horror like because of how it happens.
This is just how grotesque the demise itself is.
Well, I think because body horror to me is the reduction of the human to meat. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it's a reminder that at the end of the day, anything can be done to the human body that sort of eliminates personality and life and all these other things. It's just sort of like a body horror it emphasizes the physical nature of our existence and how dependent we are on it. And so in that moment, in that scene, she goes from being this vibrant character to just being impaled by these wooden shafts. And it's to me that it's like the most grueling scene in the movie for me to watch.
That's a tough one. Yeah. Because it really comes out of nowhere. Like, if you're not expecting that, and there's no reason you should be, the impact is even worse. And again, we as the audience are put into Dee's place, which makes us emotionally resonate with him very strongly. It's a very affecting movie for that.
So yeah, I mean, I'm almost wishing we should have watched Detective Dee and talked about it today. Now that I'm thinking about it,
we did.
But we did.
Those things happened.
But we didn't consciously watch it. The last time I saw Detective Dee was like 2 years ago, I think. So I'm going vaguely by memory here. But I've seen it a lot, so I feel like a lot of the key scenes are sticking in my head. But yeah, it's a great movie, and again, I think it's oddly fitting that it came up during the House of Paper Shadows, just given the
Detective Dee would be right at home in investigating the House of Paper Shadows, and he'd be in just as much danger.
Yeah, no, he would, and it's definitely Detective Dee territory. But yeah, so we've been going on for over an hour though, so we
should wrap it up.
Yeah,
man.
So, but we covered a lot, and again, I will link to the images that Francesca has below. I'll also link to Bloody Parrot. If I don't, for whatever reason,
House of Paper Shadows too. Don't forget, like, you can get this for on demand.
Yeah, link House of Paper. Yeah, I'll link that too. So marketing's not like my number one skill. People might have noticed. So.
Trust me, they want to buy it.
Yeah.
I wanted to buy it. I wanted this so hard. When you sent me the PDF review, I was like, holy dude, you've got to send me the whole thing. I've got to review this. I need to do a proper review of it is what I need to do. I've been so slammed with stuff lately that I've not been prioritizing doing reviews. I've got a couple that I'm behind
I totally understand. But
I really want to run this first. Like, I want to run it and then review after the running, because then I've got the designer commentary from you. I've got my own personal reading, and then I've got actual experience in having ran it. So with all three, I feel like I can give it an actually worthwhile review. It deserves a review.
The one thing I will say to you when you run this, the rule to keep in mind is how cathartic uses of kung fu techniques operate, especially on counters, because that matters a lot. If you have characters that are fighting against a higher level character in Ogre Gate, and they want to use a counter, they're supposed to use it cathartically unless otherwise stated. So, so that matters because it limits the amount of cathartic uses that you can effectively do in an evening. So, that's something I always point out to people is the is that particular rule, because if you don't see it, it really changes the dynamic of the game.
We may have to do another one of these at some point, just about Wandering Heroes, talk about the system itself. Because now that I'm becoming familiar with the game you designed, I do want to talk about it, and you seem like kind of the perfect guy to talk about it with.
Yeah, I might know a thing or two about Ogre Gate, oddly enough. But it's funny. I probably have players that know more about it than I do at this point. Like, you make a game, and then like you get people that get like even more nerdy about the details than you. And I have one player in one of my games who figured he's like a whiz Magic player, and he's like just one of these people that's like, he's also got a really good memory. His memory, like I've tested our memories just when I've been hanging out with him, just on my own, not like as like a literal sit down quiz, and I can tell he's got a better memory than me, and he's figured out the whole system. But yeah, I do know a thing or two about it, so I'm still worth talking to. But
I did make it after all.
but yeah, but we'll let you go. And again, you can pick up House of Paper Shadows at RPG Now or Drive-Thru. You can order it online. It's available. I have a link to the Studio 2 site, but you can also get it at various places online. It might be on Amazon at this point. I don't know. Usually by the time it gets to Amazon, it's not quite at the same hefty price tag. I think ours is $19.99, which isn't too bad actually. But
it's worth the price of admission. Yeah. Trust me.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable putting $20 on the back of this book. I think.
And it's really thin. This is something that alarmed me about it. So when I got the review copy, I was used to reading the PDF, and the PDF feels gigantic. Not because it's weighty, but because it's so like dense and rich with cool stuff. So when I actually got the paper copy, it's really small.
Yeah, it's lean. It's 100 pages.
You're not going to regret that size though, because it makes it a lot easier. Yeah. It makes it a lot easier to read. I'm certain it makes it a lot easier to run. It makes it really easy to flip through to your favorite bits. It's well laid out enough. You don't have to worry about that. And again, the only comparison I can think is to Maze of the Blue Medusa, which is optimized to be ran directly from the book, like crack open the spine, here's everything you need. This is really close. It's not, I mean, like, clearly you don't have that level of transparency, but like, you're really close. Like, this is something that's got a really clean map, key, and then the elements are all like right there, right where you need them.
I will say the thing you need to do though is you do need to, the background information is very critical, and if you don't read that in advance, you'll be struggling. So I'm
not about Maze too. Like Maze, you really should play off the cuff, but like you need to read, like any Mega Dungeon, you need to read it before you start it.
Well, where it'll trip people up is if they hit that mystery time travel adventure. That's when that becomes very important because you have to kind of know what happened. But yeah, so people can definitely pick it up, and I encourage them to do so. And hopefully, we'll be back on. I think our next movie is going to be a Chinese ghost story. We just have to secure a version for everybody. I got to get it. I'm trying to obtain the Blu-rays to send to Joel and to Adam because it's
I need to get back to talking with David Ramirez because he expressed a lot of interest in talking about that with us. So I want to see if I can schedule that.
And if that takes a little bit of time, we'll squeeze in another movie before then, like just to get an episode in. But I think it should be, obtaining them should be easy enough. And anyways, we'll be back on, and we will talk to you later.